Labadiena visi parakomanai, aš esu Mantas Vilimas ir kartu su Locked and Loaded sveikinu jūs šią išskirtinę progą. Mums ir vėl labai pasisekė turėti šį puikų svečią. Pristatau jums žmogų, kurį jau turbūt esate matę mūsų laidose. Tai yra buvęs NATO Europoje sausumos pajėgų vadas, ponas Ben Hodges. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Let's get straight to the point. We're now entering the 10th year of the war, and it seems to be far from over. By taking into account political, military, and maybe infrastructural issues, what would you say is the current situation in Ukraine?
So I'm glad you highlighted the fact that this is year 10, not year 2. Most people say second year of the war, and it is the second year. It's been 2 years of the large-scale invasion, but I think people need to remember that this thing started 10 years ago. And of course, the situation right now is very, very difficult for Ukrainian armed forces. But I would say it's also very difficult for Russia. We don't have the same transparency. We're not sure what all's going on in there, but I think the Russian economy is under enormous strain. I don't think many Russians actually want to join the army and be sent to fight against Ukrainians. So, and the fact that Mr. Putin just killed Mr. Navalny is a reminder how much the Kremlin fears their own population. So after 10 years, with every advantage, Russia still controls less than 20% of Ukraine. The Russian Navy and the Russian Air Force have both been exposed as not very good. And Russian armed forces, land forces, have suffered over 500,000 casualties. So I think, how's it going? I think this year, 2024, is a year of, number one, the Ukrainians are going to stabilize the front. I don't think that they're ready to try an offensive again. I think they will stabilize the front to buy time to reconstitute units that are worn out, to build new units, and also to build up their capabilities against Russian drones and electronic warfare. Neither side can knock out the other, not this year. The Russians cannot knock out Ukraine and vice versa. So this year, it's really going to be about industrial competition.
What would you say were the reasons for this unfortunately failed Ukrainian summer assault, and would you say that the expectations were set too high?
So 3 things, and yes, of course, we all, including me, had great hopes for this, but 3 things come to mind immediately as far as contributing to the counteroffensive, not the land portion of the counteroffensive not being as successful as we hoped. Number one, we, the West, took so much time to make decisions about providing equipment, and so the Russians had months to dig trenches, put in landmines, and prepare. So this amount of time was a gift to them, and I think that obviously was a part of it. The second thing, we failed to deliver to Ukraine what they needed to have a successful counteroffensive. We would never send an American or Lithuanian soldier into an attack if we had not already established air superiority. We still have not delivered F-16s. Pilots are training, but even a year later, we still have delivered. So I think that and the failure to provide the long-range precision weapons that would enable Ukraine to destroy Russian headquarters, Russian artillery, Russian logistics, we failed to do that. So that was the second thing that contributed to it. And then finally, we did not provide the engineering equipment needed to get through all of these landmines, minefields. That's, again, I think the blame is on us, not on Ukrainian troops who obviously did their best.
On the topic that you just mentioned, especially on the engineering equipment, do we actually even have enough of that already?
There is a lot. of course, much of it would need to be refurbished, pulled out of storage, prepared. You know, if a vehicle sits for a long time, in the engine, it seals, dry out. So it's available. It would require work. But to do that would require a commitment by the United States and Germany to say, we want Ukraine to win. And for me, this is the biggest failure on our part, is that we have not even declared what our objective is. And the administration, which has done a good job helping keep 50 nations together supporting Ukraine in sanctions, diplomacy, as well as providing equipment and ammunition, we still haven't said what the objective is. I mean, and that's the most important thing. What is the objective? What is the purpose of what we're doing? And the president also, he has not done a good job of explaining to the American people. And if he doesn't do that, then you have these knuckleheads that come up with reasons not to do it. So the president has to, my president has to explain to Americans why it's in our interest that Ukraine is successful. If he does that, then we find engineering equipment. We deliver ammunition. All that stuff will happen. The key is the strong strategic clarity on the strategic objective by our political leaders.
I believe even in your recent interviews, you have emphasized the positive impact long-range ammunition and weaponry had on the battlefield. What would you say F-16s could do in the current situation?
So I listened to SACEUR, General Cavoli, a while back, and he's the one, he got my attention on this. He said, yes, the Russians have an advantage of mass, but precision can defeat mass if you have enough time and enough precision weapons. And of course, what he's talking about is headquarters, artillery, logistics. So you might have 50,000 Russian troops outside of Zaporizhia, for example, but if the headquarters are gone, if the artillery is gone and the logistics are gone, these unlucky conscripts will not be effective. You know, we saw I'm sure you saw the story this morning that came out of a large number of Russian troops were killed standing out in a field by HIMARS. I mean, one time. That's the kind of effect you can get. And there's nowhere to hide. So, I mean, finding the headquarters, the artillery, the logistics is not hard. Being able to reach it, that's the hard part. And I think if we would provide that, whether it's ATACMS or German Taurus or more Storm Shadow, for example, from UK or Scalp from the French, it would, it won't win the war by itself, but it would neutralize their advantage. Every square meter of Russian-occupied Ukraine is in range of a U.S. 300-kilometer ATACMS. Every square meter. That means every Russian airfield, every Russian Navy base, every logistics site, every headquarters, all of them can be hit. Why do we not give that capability to Ukraine?
What would you say are the goals of Russia's winter campaign, and can this be campaign called a success?
Well, I would not call their campaign a success. I mean, here we are, let's just say 2 years since a large-scale invasion. They've lost over 500,000 killed and wounded, gone. All of their famous VDV divisions, their naval infantry, wiped out. I mean, there is a VDV division that has the shoulder patch. It's none of the same people. In fact, they have been killed twice. So this is the third generation where they put bodies back in the unit, but they don't have the same experienced leaders, the tough guys, gone. So when you think about the thousands of armored vehicles, gone. I mean, they are pulling out tanks now that are older than me, which is, if you hear T-55, that means it's from the year 1955. So that's what they're pulling out now. They're having to get ammunition from North Korea, drones from Iran. So now, of course, what I can't explain how they manage to keep finding bodies to push into the meat grinder. They're willing to do that. They obviously don't care. And the Russian people, it seems like the same DNA that Lithuanians had to stand up and fight in the streets for your independence, to regain your independence, that DNA does not exist in Russians. I mean, otherwise, they would be in the streets right now after Navalny was killed, or after 500,000 other Russians were killed. Why are they not out doing something about it? I cannot explain that yet, but I am trying to understand it. I think Russia's objectives, because they know they cannot knock out Ukraine, but they see that we in the U.S. and some European countries are, starting to falter. I think that they're willing to spend as many of their own soldiers' lives until we quit. I think that's their strategy.
Do you think that we're going to see some major difference in the battlefield after this re-election, let's say, of Putin?
That's a very interesting question. I keep reading and hearing that he did not want to do a mobilization before March the 17th, which it tells me that he does, even though this election is going to be a fake election, he's arrested all of the opposition or killed them. So nobody in the world will believe it's a legitimate election. In fact, we should all refuse to acknowledge it as legitimate because it's not. I mean, he killed the main opposition guy and has locked up or disqualified others. So regardless, they must be concerned about how Russian people think about things if they have not done a serious mobilization, and if they don't recruit out of Moscow or St. Petersburg, so that they don't want to have a bunch of funerals in those cities. So they must be concerned. I don't know if after March the 17th, if he says, okay, let's do a massive mobilization, I don't know. I'm not sure that they have the equipment and the capacity to absorb hundreds of thousands of more troops. Who's going to train them? How are they going to equip them? I don't know.
Maybe that's the whole point of keeping everybody concentrating on mass, not on quality on their side. And
yeah,
it seemed to be in direct opposite of what NATO is built on, precisely to build on precision and professionalism. And having taken that in mind, what would you say the current orientation of West, of our ammunition, of the way we're planning to organize ourselves? Are we taking the right course, taking into account all the lessons from this war?
Well, of course, there's 3 or 4 different parts of an answer to your very good question. First, yes, the alliance, I think, has done a good job of adapting to this changed environment, getting the necessary changes in the structures. Here in Vilnius last summer at the NATO summit, the decision was made to approve NATO plans for the defense. That's a huge deal. It got no attention, but it may have been the most important thing that happened, because when you have plans, you do better training, and it gives you requirements for ammunition, for movement, military mobility, these kind of things. So I think the alliance has done a good job there. We still have completely inadequate air and missile defense. After watching what Russia does against civilian targets in Ukraine, it's clear we do not have the ability to protect all of our critical infrastructure, and certainly not, 450 million European citizens. This is a problem. This is a vulnerability of ours. And if Russia has made the terrible decision to attack a NATO country, that means they've also already made the decision to launch missiles against Klaipeda or Gdansk or Bremerhaven. We're not prepared for that. The nations, of course, have responsibility. And so much focus has been on 2%, and Lithuania, of course, has been has invested in defense for years, one of the leaders. But 2% is input. That's not a output. And I'm not sure that all of us are doing everything we can and should do as far as output for effective deterrence. It's still very difficult to move armored formations across Europe, to go from Netherlands or Germany through Poland to get all the way up to Estonia. It's still difficult, or down to Romania. So we've got to keep working on this military mobility. I don't think that here in Lithuania, how good are we at cooperating with neighbors, with Latvia, for example, or Estonia or Poland? There's no doubt the quality of women and men in Lithuanian armed forces and the leadership, excellent. But Lithuania is not an island. I said the same thing to my friends in Estonia yesterday, by the way. They're not an island. But we still are not cooperating with the countries on major equipment. Each of the 3 Baltic countries has its own, which of course they're sovereign countries. Of course they can do that. And each nation has its own reasons. But I don't know if we are as effective as we could be. I also don't know if we are as effective as we could be on use of our reserves. I think Lithuania has close to 90,000 soldiers in the reserves. Has every one of them been called and said, if there's a crisis, you will report here? Has this system been exercised yet? This is a political decision. You know, you have excellent military leadership. They know how to do things, but they need political support and direction to do something like to call up all the reservists for an exercise or to practice that system. I think, I don't know, and this is not just Lithuania, this is in a lot of European countries. I don't know that we're as good at that as we should be.
Just before we turn on our cameras, and I believe the last time too, you were emphasizing on the necessity for Baltic states to cooperate more. Would you mind telling us a little bit more on exactly what cooperation would you see as the critical for us currently?
So, first of all, the movement. I mean, NATO forces and Lithuanian forces should be able to move easily between Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And the NATO allies that are here, for example, the German battle group that will soon be a brigade. I was speaking to Germans, by the way, in Munich last week at the Munich Security Conference. They are fired up. I mean, they are committed to making this work. So this is a good thing. But it still is difficult for American, British, German, Dutch, Poles to move freely inside the Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to cross the borders. Rail Baltica is still not finished, okay? This is an area where I think cooperation could improve. And then you have to say, you know, are you buying the same equipment? I mean, can you agree on what's the best armored fighting vehicle or howitzer or whatever? You don't have to, but in terms of cost and logistical support, if you have too many different type platforms, it's more difficult for logistics. And again, I understand each nation has its own, but that's an area where you wonder if you could have more cooperation. Finally, the regional plans, I think, will help solve this other problem, which is integration of national plans into a NATO plan for defense of the region. I think this is an important step. We're probably in a better place now than we were a couple of years ago. I don't know, I'm not in the Army anymore, but my sense is that we're in a better place on that type of cooperation.
I don't know if you have mentioned or if you know that Your recent visit to Lithuania, well, gave us bitter yet very timely and welcome words of caution that caused quite a storm in Lithuanian security community. Do you see any progress in Lithuania acting on your words? For example, our decision for military expenditure in it being increased tanks we were decided to buy, and the discussions on the drones intensifying.
So, of course, each nation makes its own decisions, and the leadership has to procure the equipment and capabilities it needs based on the concept of defense. You know, how does Lithuania intend to defend its people and its territory integrated inside NATO? And then do you have the right capabilities to do that? These are always tough decisions. You know, if you go with tanks, you know, there's a maintenance requirement, there's a training requirement, and they're expensive. But they're also very good. So these are the kind of tough decisions that the leadership has to make, and what gives Lithuania the best chance to be successful in performing its part of the NATO plan for the region and for protecting Lithuanian people. Again, the amount spent is important. What do you get for that? That's the most important thing. Every nation, including my own, is constantly having to deal with the tension between what we need for defense or deterrence, but all the other requirements as well. I mean, and so the leadership has to be able to explain that to the population. This is why we're doing this. And it's more expensive to have to fight a war if deterrence fails. And so I think, you know, the leadership in your country, of course, has to explain that. Anything that I said here on my last visit and that I'll say here this time is out of respect for a Lithuanian ally. I have so many friends here in Lithuania that I've met over the years, both civilian and military. And Lithuania sits in a really, really important place on the map between, you know, with the Suwalki corridor, the Poland and Baltic countries to your north. It's a tough place. And small country, small population. Is everybody in the population committed? Whether they're in the reserve or they're working, is the government doing everything to make sure that communities are prepared? That's an important part of this. It's not just the army. You know, it's not just the Iron Wolf Brigade or the Lithuanian division that defends Lithuania. It's over 1 million Lithuanians that are part of that as well. That's the job of the government, to make sure that, and community leaders.
Let's take a look on a little, let's say, not so positive notes. How do you assess the effectiveness of NATO's decision-making process during the current political, let's say, turmoil in the United States?
Well, the alliance, for what it does, is very good. I was at a dinner the other night in Munich with Secretary General Stoltenberg, and I listened to him. He is amazing. I mean, he really, and Admiral Rob Bauer, the chairman of the military committee, and General Cavoli, the Supreme Allied Commander, these are exceptional leaders. And so, of course, when you've got 31 nations, soon to be 32, when Hungary finally drops their block of Sweden, it's amazing how well the alliance does. And there's a reason other nations are in a queue wanting to join NATO. And I think actually big decisions happen a lot faster than maybe people might assume. The problem is when a country blocks things, or in the case of my country, after 75 years of being a leader in NATO, now we have a former president that says an outrageous thing like, you know, I told Putin that he could do whatever the hell he wants to a NATO country that's not 2%. That's incredible. It's unbelievable. It's dangerous because that conveys to the Kremlin, you know, if Trump comes back as a president, maybe they're not so committed. And the thing that has always made NATO so strong as a deterrent force is because the Russians never worried or wondered, are they committed? Now I think that door is open, and I think that's dangerous and irresponsible. And also it shows a degree of strategic illiteracy by the former president and his enablers. He's not by himself, by the way, but there are people that don't understand why it's in our interests that NATO is strong, that Europe is secure. It's our interests. And I think we have to make it clear to make sure that our European allies, as well as the Russians, don't question 1 second that the United States is committed.
And according to the latest data, in the United Kingdom, there was only, I believe, 14% of young people that said they would voluntarily join to defend their country, and there were 43% of respondents who would do anything to avoid it. Will Western militaries be able to would be able to conduct a large-scale conventional war?
Well, this is a good question. The populations, young people, if they don't believe that there's a real threat, or if their governments don't explain what's going on, and that if people are not convinced that they will be properly trained, put in a good unit, have the right equipment, and if something happens, that their family will be taken care of. If they're not sure about it, then not everybody's going to want to, this is not some game, it's not an adventure. I saw those numbers from UK, surprising, especially given their history. But I think if the Prime Minister takes the time to explain what's going on, why this is important, and if there really was a perceived threat to UK, I predict a lot of people would show up. I turn this over, you know, you think about Germany 10 years ago, I remember seeing a poll that most Germans said they had no interest in joining the Bundeswehr or helping to defend somebody else. I saw a poll the other day, I live in Frankfurt, said 81% of Germans said more money should go to the Bundeswehr. 81%, not 51, 81%. That's a remarkable
And that's
turnaround.
quite a turnaround, I believe.
It's incredible. And again, this is because people like the Defense Minister, Pistorius, they are, and others, Baerbock, Habeck, all these German leaders, even Scholz, the Bundeskanzler, is explaining to their population, there's a threat. I mean, when you have a German, senior German official publicly use the phrase, the word kriegstüchtig, prepared for war. 3 years ago, he would have been run out of town. Now it's like, yeah, we have to. So that's, to me, this is the importance of leadership and of leaders speaking plainly to their population as if they were adults.
And let's finish on a little bit more positive note. Besides everything, NATO is expanding, and we have already 2 new members of our family. What could you say about Sweden and Finland and how their membership in NATO is going to look like?
So NATO got better the minute that Finland officially joined, and it will get better the minute that Sweden is officially in the alliance. You're talking about 2 countries that have strong liberal democratic societies, fit, resilient people. They both have very strong defense industry. They both have very good rapid mobilization cultures. And the geography is really to our advantage, to the advantage of Lithuania. Now, Russia has no real ability to operate in the Baltic Sea if we decided we didn't want them to. I mean, other than St. Petersburg and then, of course, Kaliningrad, That's it. And so this was a huge mistake by Vladimir Putin to do what he did, where now Sweden and Finland are joining the alliance. It changed the geometry, it changed the calculus, it changed every mathematical aspect of this strategic situation because of his attack on Ukraine. It's shameful that it's taken so long to get Sweden done, but I think, you know, I was reading this morning that the leadership of the Fidesz party has said they will do it. You know, let's see. I thought they would have done it already, but hopefully that happens soon.
Better later than never.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges, for your time.
Thank you for the privilege.
Thank you. Ir ačiū Jums, brangūs žiūrovai, nepamirškite sekti Locked and Loaded mūsų Facebook paskyroje. Iki.